Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast of your favorite team in the Bay Area. And on today's episode, we dive into another draft profile. We're going to start doing these twice a week now as we gear up towards the draft. Beau Akey of the Barrie Colts. Brock Otten makes his Locked On Sharks debut. So we're going to dive into Akey, and then Brock's going to give his take on the Carlsson, Smith, and Michkov debate. So all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Sharks.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm your host, JD Young, contributor at San Jose Hockey Now, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. We're proudly a part of the Locked On Network, where we cover your team every day, and you can easily find us wherever you get podcasts and watch this on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Dakota sitting here as well. It's a nice Dakota sleeping shots, but we have Brock Otten on from McKeen's Hockey. He talks about Beau Akey and kind of a guy who's could be looked at as a potential pick at number 36 for the Sharks, but maybe more of a middle round guy. We will see. But Akey, a lot of potential, kind of toolsy guy who needs to put it all together. So before we get into today's episode, do need to let you know that today's episode is brought to you guys by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedon, and when you enter promo code LOCKEDONNHL, they'll throw you in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. And now we bring on Brock Otten, the director of scouting for McKeen's Hockey, also on the OHL podcast with our bald king, Tony Ferrari. Brock, how are you doing today, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me, JD.
I do have to, off the top, do you guys fight over the bald king status? I've noticed, Tony has pretty much laid claim. Are you
It's a tough one. I feel like I abdicated the throne. I don't know. I kind of just let him have it. Not really fighting over it. Is that a title worth fighting over? I'm not really sure. It's something he's proud of. So, I mean, yeah, I embrace my baldness, but it's definitely Tony's the king, I think.
Yeah, I think with that one, it's probably better just to let Tony have it and not. It's pick your battles, right? That's what they always say is pick your battles when it comes to a partnership. And that one doesn't seem like it's worth fighting over. So somebody who might be worth fighting over in the draft. Look at that segue. One Beau Akey, a defenseman out of the OHL, played last season with the Barrie Colts. 6 foot, 170 pounds, 66 games, had 11 goals, 36 assists, and 129 shots on goal. And Brock, what makes Beau Akey such an intriguing prospect?
Yeah, I think the main thing is his mobility. He's one of the better skating players in the draft period, not just defenders. And when you've got a game where the foundation of his game is that movement and those movement qualities in today's NHL with how fast the pace is, I think that makes him a very intriguing player. He's a very modern day NHL defender, and he's very raw. There are a lot of components to his game that are going to require development. And that's why he's somebody who's rated in that sort of mid-second, early third round range, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, depending on who you ask. But the mobility is the number one strength for Beau.
So, I mean, yeah, you kind of mentioned where there's a huge, just kind of wide variety of these defensemen are kind of in that second round picks. And, the Sharks have a 36 and they don't pick again until the late third. So it feels like if they potentially wanted to get him, they're going to have to take him with that number 36 pick. But, I mean, is he a guy who, you said he's a modern day defenseman. Do you see him maybe potentially kind of sneaking up into the end of the first round? If there's a team that just all it takes right is one team to fall in love with him, right?
Yeah, you know what? Early on in the year, maybe halfway through the year, I would have said yes. I think he didn't have the greatest second half to the year. I think a lot of that had to do with Brandt Clarke coming back to Barrie. It pushed him down the lineup, obviously, when you've got a player like Brandt returning to the lineup. It's going to mean less power play time for Beau. It's going to mean less 5-on-5 time for Beau. Different kind of role for him. And I think he kind of struggled with that. And I think that probably keeps him out of that first round range, whereas previously I might have said yes. I think that makes him more likely a mid-second or early second, depending on how much value teams are putting on mobility from the back end, right? You've got some really good skating defenders available in this draft. It's not the best draft year for defenders, but you have some very intriguing players. And I think the other thing too with Beau is that his upside is quite high. I don't think we quite know what he's going to be, right? Like I mentioned the word raw, right? And he flashes really good puck skill, and he's really good at holding the offensive blue line. He's a player who doesn't really know or hasn't really gained the confidence in using his skating ability to push and be that elite transporter, that guy who is leading the attack in transition. And I think that's the big next step for Beau is, can he be somebody who is an offensive leader from the back end, or, does he settle into more of like a two-way guy? But that also means he's going to have to learn to use his mobility better to defend. And that's an area of his game that, when we get into some of the weaknesses of his game that we'll talk about. So there's a high upside. There's obviously some inherent risk there, but I think a sort of mediocre second half probably keeps him out of the first and probably in that range, like you said, where the Sharks are picking.
All right. So, I mean, you mentioned Brandt Clarke, right? And Brandt Clarke will not be there next year because he's a very good player. He's going to be in the NHL. Could you see maybe then whoever picks him and maybe picking a guy whose maybe value is just a little bit too low, and we're going to see a guy next year when Brandt Clarke's back? I know Barrie, they're losing like Ethan Cardwell, but probably still going to be a pretty good team next year. Maybe, and then next year you kind of see that explosion offensively. Is that a potential with him?
I think 100%. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because my assistant director of scouting, Derek Newmeyer, I don't know if you are familiar with Derek's work, but he and I had a discussion about this the other day, about the concept of, do NHL teams draft based on a projection of where a player is going to fit into a lineup in the next couple of years, right? Are you going to draft a player high who's being blocked by another player, right? Or are you looking at those scenarios, those situations where there is a lot of runway for a player's ice time and responsibility to increase? And I think it's a really interesting concept, and definitely one that fits Beau, because as you mentioned, Brandt will be moving on, and Beau will basically take over that role that he started the year in, right? Beau was the number one power play QB. He was the number one defenseman for Barrie. And then when Brandt returned, he moved into that second pairing role. And next year he's going to slide back up, and hopefully he's going to be more confident. Hopefully another offseason of development in terms of strength, quickness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those athletic tools makes him a better player. Hopefully going to an NHL development camp, talking with the NHL development team members and scouts and players in that role, or personnel in that role, I should say, makes him a better player too, and gives him an understanding of the different ways that he can advance his game, right? So there's a lot of definitely a lot of things that go into it. I know that's a long-winded answer for a simple question, and the answer is yes. I think there's a very large opportunity for Beau to develop into one of the better premier offensive defenders in the OHL next season, not 2 years from now. Yeah. Next year. He's going to have a very good opportunity in Barrie.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite the same, but like you look at like Sharks prospect Galen Larocque, right? When he was drafted in the 4th round, everyone's like, who's this guy? And then next year he got those first pair of minutes and, kind of blew up. And a lot of Sharks fans were very, very intrigued by Galen Larocque going forward. I know this last season was, hampered by injuries with him, but you could kind of, you give a guy this potential and give him that opportunity and see what he does with it. So, all right, guys, before we continue our conversation with Brock, we talk about kind of what is maybe holding Akey back, where he kind of tops out at as a defenseman. He gives a pretty good comp for Akey. Before we get into all that, do need to take a quick break, talk to you guys about our new friends, Bird Dogs. So right now, I am actually wearing my pair of Bird Dogs. They sent me a pair, and they're literally some of the most comfortable shorts I've ever had. Great for a perfect Saturday short, right? Yeah, spend Saturday morning with your doing, soccer. Maybe you go to Home Depot, maybe Bed Bath and Beyond. You'll see. We got to see how the schedule looks. So, but whatever you're doing, there show the comfort and versatility for whatever you need to do. So, literally, again, some of the most comfortable shorts I've ever worn. They're super soft, super kind of flexible. They got nice little zipper pockets, so you don't have to worry about your stuff falling out. If you're, at the pool, at the beach, or whatever you're doing, you don't have to worry about that. So, go check them out. They're going to make it super easy for you right now. They're going to give you a nice free Yeti cup. So if you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. That way, keep your drink cold while you're at the pool. So again, go check out Bird Dogs at birddogs.com. Use the promo code LockedOnNHL to get that free Yeti tumbler today. You talked about his weaknesses, right? And how he kind of needs to continue to kind of grow and develop. So what do you think is going to be the one thing that really holds him back, or potentially kind of, makes it so he doesn't reach his full potential?
I think it's sort of twofold. I think the first thing is assertiveness, aggressiveness, whatever word you want to use. That's something that Beau doesn't have consistently right now. And I kind of mentioned that he's somebody who's still learning to use his skating ability to be a premier offensive player. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is just not being aggressive enough. He's not somebody who looks to consistently push across the opposing blue line. He'll gain the neutral zone and dump in or defer or look to make a pass to a streaking line mate coming down the wing. He's not somebody who is constantly pushing the pace the way that he can. And I think that will come. I think the more concerning thing is for a player who has such good mobility, he can have some very sloppy footwork in the defensive end because he's just not playing aggressive enough. He kind of looks like sometimes when he's defending transitional attacks, when he's defending pace, that he doesn't really know what to do. There's kind of like being caught in the middle where he kind of caught standing still. He's just not moving his feet. And I think when he learns, or hopefully when he learns to be more aggressive because his mobility is so strong, it'll make him so much better and more effective as a defensive player. And I think in the second half, we started to see a little bit more physical intensity from him, which is great. And I think that as he gains strength, that will come. I'm not necessarily worried about that. I think it's just about learning to use that mobility to be somebody who is very quick to retrievals, quick to, pin on the wall, quick to close down lanes, and just, like I said, be more assertive. He doesn't have to necessarily be more physical. It's just getting those stick and lanes quicker and really jumping up at the blue line to apply pressure instead of letting teams dictate pace. He should be the one that does that because of that strong forward way mobility, right? And then the other thing that I think it really needs to improve in his game is his puck management in the defensive end. He's somebody who I find has some bad habits. Not always incorporating shoulder checks into his game when he's retrieving, and turnovers can be an issue. Forechecks can be an issue for him, and that shouldn't be a problem for somebody who is an elite mover, right? There should be a trust there to take those right angles, take better routes to those dump ins so that he can get the play moving up the other way very, very quickly. And there are times where he gets hemmed in where he really shouldn't be, and I think that's just going to be an experience thing. And I think that we see it. It's just not consistent. And when he's struggling, which I found sometimes in the second half it is because he's just not being assertive enough with the puck in his own end either, right? And the forecheck closes in on around him and he's not trusting his feet and he's not shoulder checking. And next thing you know, it's a turnover, right? So again, I hope that sort of paints a picture of the word that I was using with Beau, and that's raw, right? You've got this really, really athletic modern day defender who just has to tighten up a lot of components of his game. Like there's a very wide variety of outcomes when it comes to Beau in terms of his NHL projection.
I mean, yeah. So it's like you said, raw. A lot of tools. Like you can see it there, and it sounds like he just needs more reps. He's just a guy who just needs to play more hockey and continue to work on that stuff. But it does sound like a very intriguing player. I mean, I'm super intrigued by it. And hopefully, if you work on that skate, or he has the skating, but just utilizing his tools that he has, right? And being that, and I know you said his projection is tough, but what type of defenseman do you project him to be when he gets to the NHL? I mean, if you have a comp, I'm more than love to hear a comp, but is he, you said it feels like he could be an offensive, if he figures out his offensive game more, he could be an offensive mover, good two-way player. Like where do you kind of picture him landing eventually?
Yeah. I mean, comps are always tough, right? It depends on who you ask. But the one guy that kind of jumps out to me when I think of Akey and what he's probably most likely to become is TJ Brody.
Okay.
I remember watching Brody with Windsor back in the day. And he was a guy who didn't really understand how to use his mobility as well. It kind of took him a few years to really gain confidence in his transporting ability and his ability to play aggressively in the defensive end. And once that kind of got unlocked, we saw him become an elite defender at the OHL level and eventually a very good NHL defender and more of like a two-way guy, but somebody who can move the puck. It depends on the role that he's asked to play on his team, right? Like in Toronto with Morgan Riley there, it's just not something that they're asking him to do. But early on in his career, right, when he was with Calgary, at times that was something that they were asking of him, right? And I do think that that's probably the most likely outcome for Beau is somebody in that sort of like second pairing two-way role.
Makes sense. All right. So we know he's probably going to be in the OHL for a couple of years, and defensemen do take a little bit longer to marinate type of thing. So probably looking about 4 years you would expect before he's really kind of making it an NHL impact.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would agree with that. I think very rarely do you see CHL defenders make that jump from 2 years right to the NHL level. Or even 1 year, that's even more rare, right? So especially when they're not a top 5, top 10 pick, right? These players are being selected in the second, third, fourth round for a reason. It's because there's a lot of things that they need to work on. And I think Beau is that player. And I think that at minimum, you're probably looking at 2 more years in the OHL and at least a year in the AHL before he's ready. And maybe more. Maybe if he's the type of guy that when he goes pro, when he turns pro, it's kind of like starting the clock again. Now he has to gain the confidence to adjust to the pace of the pro level. And it takes a few years for him to really do that. And then, he's ready to step into an NHL lineup, or maybe it comes quickly for him. So I would probably put it anywhere between like 3 and 5.
Okay. So, I mean, with Akey, right, you feel like you're getting a solid player. What is kind of the worst case scenario for him? Is it just he just never kind of puts it together and is always that like toolsy guy that GMs kind of talk themselves into and like, oh, I can fix them, and just never kind of gets it together?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, worst case scenario, those tools just don't come together. He ends up being, a solid junior player, junior defender, but one of those guys who doesn't have anything elite outside of the feet. And unfortunately, you need at least a couple sort of high-end qualities, right? So I think that's the worst case scenario for sure.
All right, guys, before we finish up, we start talking about Michkov and Smith and Carlsson, and Brock gives his input on who he would pick if he was general manager Mike Greer. Do want to thank you guys for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. We're again proudly a part of the Locked On Network, where we cover your team every day. If you want to be an everydayer, all you got to do is just come back next week. We're going to be talking trades next week. So I'm going to look at potential trades with the 26th pick. Maybe if the Sharks want to, instead of using that as draft, maybe they want to kind of kickstart the rebuild, looking at some potential free agent or RFA targets, some potential guys who might be on the out. So we're going to be talking about trades next week, start looking at Erik Karlsson potential trades, and then more draft profiles. Again, we're going to be doing 2 of these a week between now and the draft. So again, just make sure you guys are following along wherever you get podcasts, and of course, watch on YouTube as well. All right. Before we get you out of here, wanted to kind of switch to some broader NHL talk, and I'm going to ask you what I've been kind of asking all the public scouts recently. So the Sharks at the 4th pick, probably going to be choosing between one or two of these three, between Leo Carlsson, Matvei Michkov, and Will Smith. You are now GM, Mike Greer. What are you doing?
Who are they taking at 3? That's what I'm asking. No, I know. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? Like, realistically, San Jose is going to have an easier choice than that because one of those guys is going to go at 3, right? Yep. Personally, I think I would lean Will Smith.
Okay.
He's somebody that I saw just massive improvement from over the course of this year. Early on in the year, I felt that he was somebody who sometimes disappeared a little bit when physical intensity increased. I felt like there were times where his puck management wasn't terrific. That term hero puck gets thrown around a lot, right? And he's somebody who's so skilled that turnovers, especially in the offensive zone and the neutral zone, were a problem, as he would just try to force plays instead of just trusting his line mates. And over that second half, we really saw that Perreault and Leonard and Smith line feast, dominate, whatever synonym you want to use, right? And I think a big reason for that was the development of Smith as sort of an overall offensive player. And I wasn't sold at the beginning of the year. I would say like up to about like December or January, I actually preferred Oliver Moore, and I actually preferred Ryan Leonard to Will Smith. I just felt like their qualities maybe were more likely to succeed at the pro level. But I just think that Will developed really well. I think he improved on every area that he needed to improve on. And we saw that sort of culminate with that dominating performance at the U18s, where he was, in my opinion, clearly the best player at that tournament, and obviously was awarded as such as the tournament MVP. And I think that when you're looking at San Jose, right, you're looking at a team that
it's winning the cup next year. No,
I mean, I like the optimism, but
no, they're going to be bad. I'm 100% on board of them being bad for as long as possible.
I'm just trying to think of players that I think would really fit in with what San Jose is building currently. And I think the skill of Will and his on-puck play, I think, is something that San Jose and any team can really use to elevate the play of the players around them, right? And I look at Matvei Michkov, and I think of the inherent risk there, right?
Yep.
Okay, he fits within San Jose's timeline. They're probably not going to be competing for a cup for at least a half decade. And Matvei takes 3 years to come over, so be it, right? I think a lot of that is overblown because most of these guys are not going to be impact players for 3 or 4 years anyway, right? Yes. So I think that is an overblown component. But when I look at how he might fit into San Jose, I look at him being like a really, really, really good complementary piece, maybe not as sure of a thing as a play driver as Will is. Okay. I think that Matvei's play on the puck in terms of the decisions that he makes, I think, are not as refined as Will. I think his off-puck understanding of spacing and things like that are not as refined as Will. I think both of them are never going to be high-end two-way players. That's definitely a drawback compared to Carlsson, right? Where you've got Leo, who does project as a really solid overall two-way player, right? And that is also something that I think San Jose could use, right? And so it's a toss-up. The one thing that I've heard people talk about, and I'm sure it's something that people have mentioned in this response on your podcast, is, which of these guys is most likely to stay at center between Will Smith and Leo Carlsson, because that's obviously going to make them a more valuable player. And I think the answer is, I don't think there's a sure thing that either of them stay down the middle. I think that Leo is definitely more likely to stay at center, in my opinion. But I don't think it's like a 100% slam dunk. And I think that's really what separates Adam Fantilli from this group is he's somebody who is definitely going to be a play driving center play driving two-way physical center at the NHL level. And I think that's why he's just so clearly the number 2 for me anyway. Whereas the rest of these guys, I really don't know if they end up being centers long-term, right? Will Smith, you look at him maybe like Trevor Zegras, right? Somebody who, has played center, but with Anaheim adding Fantilli now into the fold, I assume anyway, adding Adam Fantilli into the fold,
and
likely pushes, right.
Yeah.
They've already got McTavish. You've got the two of them. Probably Zegras slides to the wing.
Yep.
He's already done that a bit in his pro career, and I would assume it happens more long-term now. So is that sort of the future for Will Smith as well? I do think that they're kind of similar players, right, in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. So I kind of getting back to my answer here, I would lean Will. And I think that if I had to pick a second choice, it would be Leo. I think it would be between the two of them. I just don't know if I like the fit for Michkov in San Jose, and at least compared to the other two.
Makes sense. I mean, my motto though is the mantra on this podcast is defense is for nerds. Just go score. That's been my mantra, especially since Leo Carlsson showed up. Just defense is for nerds. Go score a bunch of goals and you'll be fine. So, but no, I mean, you when you're picking there, we're nitpicking, right? And you'd be happy. The Sharks will be happy with whoever they get here, but that's part of the game, right? Is nitpicking these guys here. And it's been. I've had Tony, who's been very much Leo Carlsson. I just had Hattie, who was like they should draft Michkov, and now I got you saying Will Smith. So I'm getting a nice gamma. And again, whoever the Sharks pick here, you're going to be really happy with going forward. So, ask one more kind of quick question about the draft here. So, which guy, kind of in the back end of the first round, which guy is being kind of underrated, or we're going to look back in 5 years and go, wow, how did this guy slide all the way to here? Which guy, who's your kind of personal guy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the answer to this kind of is related to what I mentioned with Will Smith, right? Mm-hmm. One thing that I really, really look at for the draft and projecting players is that progression over the course of a season.
Yep.
And one guy that I felt really did that, and I think we're seeing that reflected in rankings now, is David Edström from Sweden. I think when I watched him early on in the year, I saw a good player, but I didn't see somebody that I thought could be more than like a quality third liner, more than like a Adam Lowry type at the NHL level. And I think that the skill components of his game and his ability to drive play really, really improved over the course of the season, basically in all the major tournaments that Sweden played in. And I think we saw that culminate with a really strong U18 performance for him. And I think that him and a guy like Anton Wahlberg, another teammate on Sweden, I think those two guys are the type of athletic, bigger, skilled guys that the NHL teams are really starting to focus on developing now, because we're starting to see these are the kind of guys that you win in the playoffs with, right? We're kind of seeing that right now with Dallas, right? With how Rupe Heinz is playing, right? Like there's a guy who was drafted with that sort of projection, that athleticism, right? And I think we're seeing it across the board from other teams, right? There's that focus on let's draft really good athletes and see how the other components of their game come together. And when you progress really well over the course of even a half season and show that you're already taking those steps, I think that's really, really important. So I would say the two Swedish guys in Edström and Wahlberg are two guys that I think when we look back on this draft may be undervalued.
All right. Get out of here with the last two questions. Question number 1, 5 years from now, the non-Connor Bedard, who's the best player in the draft?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm probably going to say Will Smith. I do think so. I don't think that
better than Fantilli.
Yeah, I think Adam is going to be a really, really good player, but I think it's more likely that we find somebody after Bedard that ends up being a better NHL player than Fantilli. I just think he's such a sure thing to be an impact player in some regard. Maybe it's like a consistent 55, 60 point guy who plays in all situations and is somebody who wears a letter and, is really important for your team. But maybe when you look back at the draft, they're like the 5th, 6th best player taken or the 4th best player, not that number 2. So that's sort of like why I would probably lean towards somebody like Smith. And I don't think any of the defenders from this class are going to be in the conversation for that. I think there's going to be a lot of good defensemen, but I don't think there's anybody that I would say ends up being an elite NHL defender, even guys like Ryan Backer and Sandin Pellikka. Yeah, I would probably lean Will Smith. I think that would be my number one choice for that answer.
All right, and then last question. Where does Beau Akey get drafted? What pick?
Ooh, okay. 47.
47. That would be to the Nashville Predators, who all they need is just another defenseman to throw in their pipeline and just crank them out. That's what they do. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense, right? Yeah, Brock, you said it all. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, so on Twitter at Brock Otten. We've got the podcast with Tony on the Hockey News where we cover the OHL. And
just listen to Brock's parts, and I fast forward through Tony's parts. So
that's kind of the feedback that I've gotten that most people do. So I don't know. It's only a matter of time before it's just one bald guy. I don't know. No. So yeah, you got our THN on the O podcast, which we're running up on 30 episodes now, which is great. So thank everybody for following along so far. And my work at McKeen's, we've got our draft guide releasing first week of June. Probably we're just starting work. We've just finalized our final list, if you will, and now starting to work on all the meat of the draft guide. So you can look for that at the beginning of June. I also have my own website, OHL Prospects, which I've had for about 15 years, where I just cover the OHL. So I'll be releasing my final rankings for just the OHL guys on that. Probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll have my meat hole that I always do as well.
Brock, thanks so much, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, JD. It's fun.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Brock. Really interesting that he went Smith there. We've been, a lot of people, the majority of people have been Carlsson, Michkov, Will Smith. I know the defense there. You guys know me. Defense is for nerds. Go score a bunch of points. But again, as we've talked about before, no matter who they pick if they pick between one of those three players, you're walking away. You're going to feel really good about who they pick. There's plenty of question marks with Michkov that I understand. Leo Carlsson probably is going to go to Columbus, but maybe Will Smith's there. Again, really fun. As for Beau Akey, I'm really intrigued to see kind of with Brandt Clarke gone, if he is a guy who can really kind of see what we saw, kind of develop into the guy that we saw at the beginning of the season. Brandt Clarke is really good. Reason why he was picked 8th in the draft, and the Kings are going to get another just amazing player because that's what the Kings do. They draft good players all the time. So, but Beau Akey, I think he's going to be in the mix for the Sharks at 26. Maybe if they move down potentially with that pick, or not 26, sorry, at 36. If the Sharks move down from 36, or maybe they package up and want to move up, and and so plenty of draft capital that they can kind of do whatever they want in this draft. So, thanks again to Brock for joining the show. Thanks again to you guys for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Again, we'll be back on Monday. We're going to kickstart our trades week, looking at some of the different potential trades. Everybody loves talking trades, so got to look at realistic targets for free agents. Maybe some if the Sharks want to do some salary cap, eat some salary cap for people and try to gain some more. Matt Murray, I'm looking at you. Maybe we'll talk about Erik Karlsson, who of course is the big trade target out there. So again, make sure you guys follow along wherever you get podcasts. And you can also follow the show on YouTube as well. If you haven't already, follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. You can follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole. And until Monday, bye friends.